Hello, everybody, and welcome to this natural fermentation workshop. My name is Garnet. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the city coordinator for Leftovers in Edmonton. I'm very excited to have my mom on to talk about something that she's very passionate about, and I am also really excited to learn more about. Normally, I would have my Leftovers t-shirt on, and I would have a Leftovers banner behind me, and you would think if I am introducing my mom, that I would be in the kitchen with her hanging out. However, I am a very privileged climate refugee currently on an uninvited guest on the Squamish and Hunkaminoo unceded territory, which is otherwise known as Burnaby, BC. I was on vacation and unable to go home this week as the floods wiped out the majority of the roads. Most of you, however, are probably joining from Treaty 6 territory in the Edmonton area. That is the traditional land of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and many other Indigenous people, including urban Indigenous people. If you're interested in supporting Indigenous people and also taking action on climate change to reduce the frequency of these natural disasters, you might want to consider looking into Indigenous Climate Action. They are a fantastic group that is doing a lot of advocacy around the recent COP26, I believe it is. Today, we are talking about naturally fermented foods, such as sauerkraut, and also some canned foods, such as this crabapple honey jam. And Indigenous people have been fermenting foods and preserving foods for as long as people have been around. And I guarantee you that your ancestors were also Indigenous and have also been doing that. So beyond extending the life of the food in our fridge, I would encourage us to consider how fermenting food and preserving food reconnects us with the food and also might connect us with what it means to be indigeneity, as this food not only creates the culture for us socially, but also literal culture in the bacteria. Our format for this evening, Maryann will be doing a quick segment on 4 different methods of preservation and fermentation. After each segment, she'll be having a 5-minute Q&A. And with that, I would like to introduce my mother, our dearest Maryann Borch. I love her very much, and trust me, by the end of this, you will probably love her too.
Thank you very much, Garnet, and thanks for inviting me to do this. Yes, my name is Maryann, and I do use she, her pronouns. Thank you for reminding me to use those. Yeah, this is the kitchen at Good Note Community Farm, and this is where I do a lot of mixing of ingredients. Whatever happens to come across my counter ends up in a bowl or a jar at some point. And tonight we're going to talk about 4 different things. I have between 10 and 15 minutes to talk about each one, so that's not a lot of time. So we'll be just basically skimming the surface and see where that gets us. And then at the end, I'm happy to provide for you a list of links and recipes and further research that you can go into after this. So I guess we'll just get going. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was canning in general. And canning usually means one of 2 things. Either you're going to be preserving the food in a jar and using hot water to preserve it, or you might be using, again, hot water, but under pressure. So that would be called pressure canning. And that is a whole different kettle of fish that I haven't even gotten into yet, but I will skim the surface of that for you. The basic idea for hot water bath, which is what I normally have been doing, is to put the things that I've done, I guess, is fruit, tomatoes, many condiments, and basic pickles. So when I talk about fruit that can be hot water bathed, it would be things like peaches. And the reason this is possible to be preserved that way is because you're adding an acid to this, and you're creating a higher acid environment, and also the sugar itself takes away the water, and it's the water that ends up creating an environment where bad bacteria can thrive. So the idea is to get all the water out and increase your sugar concentration or your acid concentrations, and that leads to safe food preservation. So the canning of fruits, that fruit has to have a high acid content. Most of the fruits grown around Edmonton, like the berries, even apples, have high acid content. So for most of those, you just need to add a little bit of sugar or honey and a little bit of lemon juice, and then you're good to go. Tomatoes. Recently, there's been a trend towards higher sweet content in tomatoes. So if you're going to be canning salsas, oh, sorry, this is a spaghetti sauce. This is salsa. These tomatoes are heritage tomatoes, so they have a higher acid level than more of the recent hybrid tomatoes. Did you hear that? Almost no. Okay, at first I thought I'd hit that and it had gone down, which means that the seal is broken, which is it, but it actually isn't. It's fine. I was just worried. But if your seal is broken, then that's something you'll need to eat right away. So this one is fine. This one's a spaghetti and this one's a salsa. So those are tomatoes and they already have a high acid because I'm using heritage tomatoes that have a high acid content. And then what else do I have to show you? Crab apples. Those were preserved with honey. And there's an entire book called Putting It Up with Honey that helps you if you wanted to get into honey preservation rather than sugar. This one here is called piccalilli, which is a kind of relish. So that falls into the condiments grouping. This one is a Haskap and amaretto blend. So amaretto being an alcohol, that changes things a little bit, but that would be in the recipe that you're following. Basically just add sugar, or in this case, yes, it was sugar. Yeah. And what else do I have? Some black currant rosemary. Now this one is called a fruit cheese because it will come out super, super thick and you can slice it. So it's nice to add on a cheese plate. And this one is harvested high bush cranberry. So a native cranberry from my mom and dad's backyard. So this one here, just harvested, wildcrafted, that's what that's called. And then added, I think in this one, yeah, it was honey. And the last one I want to show you is choke cherries, another wild harvest one. So in this case, it was syrup, or at least it says it's syrup, but as I flip it, I don't see it actually flowing in there. So I probably added too much pectin, or enough pectin to call it jam instead of syrup. So you'll see that a lot of the things I'm making, if it doesn't work out, it's still okay. And I would just change the name and just still call it edible. We'll get into that at the very end, but that's one of my main ways of looking at things. It's how you look at it and how you are creative with what you end up with. So relishes, pickle. Oh, right. And I didn't get into pickles because I don't have any out here. Oh, yes, I do. This is, a friend gave me these pickled carrots, and these were made, how would I call this? Because you don't want to call it the traditional way, and yet it's probably become the tradition, is to save carrots and pickles in a vinegar brine, which is using a pre-existing acid to save your carrots. And what we're going to do in a few minutes is to show you how we can create that acidic environment without adding vinegar, but using the naturally occurring bacteria on the carrots to create that vinegar or that acid environment. So these ones here have the dill and the garlic in it, and those will be delicious. So thanks, Sean, for giving me those. So I'm going to slide these over. Just wanted to quickly go over, make sure I have enough time. Yes, I'm good. Some of the tools I have. Hopefully you guys can see, this is my big pot. I do a lot of canning in this pot. I have these tools here. This is for holding on to the jars and bringing in and out of that hot water bath. And I splurged and got this guy, but it's not needed. It's a little flipping this over. This would be an example. I would have maybe 6 or 12, depending on how big the batch is, of jars that these would have been washed first. And then I put them in my oven at 200 degrees. And first the oven is cold. Then I turn it on to 200. And by the time it gets to 200, these guys are sterilized and ready to go. And I can pull them out of the oven and put them on this tea towel. And then they're ready to add your hot mixture, whether it's jam or tomatoes or relishes. So once it's in there, then you can fish this out of also another pot. So the other thing I have is all of the lids would be in a small pot. I have a big pot for the hot water bath and a small pot to boil the lids. And these are always fresh, clean lids that I buy every time. And one of these days I'll figure out how to can without having to repurchase these, but I'm not there yet. But this guy just fishes that out. And normally I do that, put it on the side, and it goes over top. And then I can use my outside of my hands to keep it there. Put this on and tighten it. The liquids, the stuff, the goodies are in there. This goes into the boiling water. It's hot and it's going into hot water, so there should not be any cracking. There's no shock going from cold to hot because you have a hot substance going into a hot jar, which is then going into the hot water. So as long as you keep all of those things hot, then you won't have any shocking and you won't have any breakage. So then this sits in the hot water. Depending on the size of the jar, you could put it in for, say, 15 minutes if it's a small jar, or 20 to half an hour if it's a bigger jar. Again, those guidelines will be in all the recipes that you find. And then after it's ready, after it's sat in the boiling water for 25 minutes, then you bring it out on the counter and let it sit, and you don't touch it. And these seals will automatically squish down. They'll make a big pop sound, and then you'll know that this is sealed and it's ready to stay there and preserve for another, well, they say 2 years. This here one says 2018. I guess we're going to have to eat that this winter. But again, label what you've made and when you've made it so that you'll know when you need to eat it. Okay. I don't want to go too much into sugar and acid, other than yes, you need sugar, and yes, it needs to be acidic. But those balances and how much that is would be in the recipe that you're following. And then the other thing to consider is your pectin. If you're making a jam like the one that I showed you that's supposed to be a syrup, this guy, I added too much pectin to this. And that's why it's not a syrup. It's more like a jelly. And then this one I did on purpose. I added quite a bit of pectin on purpose to make it that fruit cheese, to make it really, really solid. So you could plop it out of this straight-sided jar onto a plate and slice it like a cheese, but it's, what is it again? Blackcurrant rosemary wine fruit cheese. So anyways, lots of goodness in this. That was only made last year. So this is good for another year, maybe Christmas time. So anyways, pectin, you can either get it pre-mixed with the dextrose, and that's your classic, again, I would call it conventional, not necessarily traditional, but that would be called Sourdough or one of those brands. And then the other kind of pectin that I'm tending to use more and more often now, because you can decrease the amount of sugar, that one's called Pomona's pectin, and that one comes with an extra packet of calcium in it. And the calcium you mix with water, create a calcium water. It shows you and tells you how much calcium water to add to your fruit mixture. And then you add your pectin, your Pomona's pectin, to the sweetener, whether it's honey or sugar. And you mix that together first before you add it to the fruit. And that, again, that's all written out on the package and why you want to do that. But the Pomona's pectin then requires less sugar, so you can make a less sweet jam if you use that. Okay, what else do I have here? I think that's all I'm going to say about canning. So if there's any questions about that, I can either get Garnet to read them out, the ones that I missed, or we can have people put themselves on and unmute themselves if you want.
That was awesome. Thanks, Mom. There was somebody named Forrest Borch. I'm not sure who that would be. Yeah, somebody named Forrest. Okay, it's my brother. I'm currently in his room. Thanks for housing us, Forrest. But he asked, what is pectin? Which I was also wondering. What is pectin, Mom?
Pectin, it's a naturally occurring substance that makes it solid. And it's an enzyme, maybe? Actually, I don't know. I know that apples and currants are naturally high in pectin. And when I was briefly going through some reminders tonight before this started, they said that I was thinking of Shada because they said it's good for diabetics, but I can't remember why now. So it's great to keep researching all this stuff, and it's good to, you can keep it in your mind, but basically read it and understand it and then do it. That's the most important thing.
Awesome. That was the only question in the chat. If anybody else has questions, maybe we'll just give a quick moment for anybody else to ask those. And if not, we'll assume that everybody learned everything they need to know about canning. How spell Paromonas pectin? Oh yeah, that's Jacqueline is asking how to spell that particular type of pectin that you recommended.
Okay, yeah, Pomona. Pomona.
Pomona.
If you're in Edmonton, you can get that from Earth's General Store.
And anything else you want from Earth's General Store, because they're the best.
Yeah.
Excellent. Looks like that is all the questions for that section. So we are ahead of time and we can move right on to vegetable fermentation. Go for it, Mom.
Excellent. Okay,
oh, sorry, hold it. How much preparation is required for veggies versus fruits? Michelle's asking.
I would say the same amount. I guess it depends on which fruit, because berries, you can just pour the whole thing into the pot. You don't have to chop them or anything like that. Veggies, you tend to have to do a lot of chopping. If you're going to make a salsa or a relish, you're going to be doing a lot of cutting of onions and cutting of cucumbers, tomatoes, that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, so let's, is that anything else? Okay.
That's all for now, yeah.
Good. So here is awesome homemade cutting board Kevin made. And I'm going to grab right behind this camera stash of carrots and a jar. And the rest I'm going to leave. Actually, no, I'm going to take this. This is winter version of dill. I showed you these awesome dill carrots that my friend Sean gave me. This is what the actual dill it looks like that you should be using. I don't know if you can see that or not, but the basic flower head of the dill plant. Now, I like to use it before it's gone to seed, but it's probably just as valuable after it's gone to seed. But when it's in full flower is very fragrant time. And the other thing, this one also has chunks of garlic in it, which will be delicious. It'll make these carrots really fun and delicious. So normally you would use that seed head or flower head, but because we're making this in winter and all the dill's dead, this is what I saved from the dill. This is just dried, and I do this into a bowl, and then I get lots of dill. So this is probably going to float, and that's going to cause me some grief. I'll show you how I would deal with that, though. So we're going to start with any old jar, and carrots. Not that knife. Whoa, this big knife. And I've already just washed these carrots here, tipping and tailing them. These bits can go in a broth if you're making a nice soup some point. And these carrots will just get chopped into bits. So let me just, well, I'm going straight into what to do rather than why do it. So let's put those in, and that guy. And I wanted to just stop and pause and go back to what I should have been saying at the beginning. This, from now on, I'll be talking about fermented foods. And Garnet was totally right at the beginning, talking about how the culture in the food, in these fermentations, they are a direct correlation between the cultures that we can create in our own society. I'll say that they are, there's a few things I'll say. And all of these things I got from a book called Wild Fermentation. And Sandor Katz wrote it. I would say he's the guru. Revitalized, what was the word they used? Anyways, he's the guy. He knows a lot about fermentation. So a lot what I've learned is from his books. The food that you're creating after you have fermented it is alive. It's alive with nutrition. And it's something that we may or may not be familiar with. We might have lost some sense of taste buds, I guess you'd say, for this kind of sour flavor. I would call it flavorful, but it is very sour. So it's either something you really like or you train yourself to like. I'm always surprised when I like wine these days because it really doesn't taste good at the beginning. It's almost something I had to train myself to enjoy. So that could be said for sourdough bread instead of fluffy sourdough bread. I mean, you can make sourdough bread two different ways, and we'll get into that too. But yeah, so basically the fermented fruits and vegetables are going to be sour, and they're going to have a tang, a flavor to them. The other thing that fermentation helps is that it preserves the vitamins and the natural nutrients in the vegetables. For example, the vitamin C in sauerkraut is preserved in the cabbages because it's being fermented. There's a great story of the guy that discovered the Hawaiian Islands. I can't remember his name now, but the reason he was able to keep all of his sailors alive for 2.5 years is because he had 27 kegs of sauerkraut, and they didn't get scurvy on that ship because they had vitamin C. So that food is preserved. It also actually increases the nutrients in the food. There are B vitamins, not B12, but many other B vitamins that are created by the bacteria when they are given that environment to grow. Folic acid is created, niacin is created, thiamine and biotin are all made by the bacteria and added to that food when we get to eat it later. It also makes the food easier to digest. It actually becomes almost pre-digested, so it makes it so that our bodies have to do less work to get all those nutrients into them. It's also full of antioxidants. Getting rid of, I never know what this word means. It always, I don't know, I feel I'm a free radical. But anyways, it gets rid of free radicals, which are supposedly bad in cancer fighting. So I don't know. I think I want that word free radical to change, but it's in use now. So there you go. Let's see. And it also removes toxins. There's some evidence in the cassava in Africa when they were fermenting the cassava, they got rid of the cyanide that was naturally occurring. So it becomes more nutritious because it has less toxins in it. Same thing with phytic acid. Phytic acid is something that naturally occurs on the outside of grains and seeds. It keeps them from sprouting until they're sufficiently basically digested in the soil. And the bacteria is what makes those seeds sprout because they've eaten through the phytic acid and created that sprouted grain. So sprouting gets rid of phytic acid, but so does soaking or fermentation. So when we add whey or sourdough starter to the wheat, then we're getting rid of a toxin, which is phytic acid. And it also gets rid of nitrates, prussic acid, oxalic acid, nitrosamines, and glucosides. Well, there you go. I read that. It was in the book. Must be good. Or they must be bad, but it removes it. Fermentation gets rid of those things. It's best to eat all of these foods alive. that is not pasteurized, which means not putting them in a hot water bath, because that would kill the bacteria that are there to help us digest it. And I just wanted to I have 4 little quotes here. It says, the cleaner we live, the more likely we'll get asthma and allergies. So that's by Dr. Rosenstreich. So basically, we want to have those bacteria around us. They help us to stay healthy. To be indispensable to the organisms with which one shares an environment, that is the strategy that ensures successful breeding and continued survival. So I'm not sure why I like that. I just like it. There you go. To promote diversity among microbial cultures in your body. It's just as important at the micro level as in our giant biosphere kind of level to have diversity. And you become more interconnected with the life forces of the world around you. So there you go. Oh, I have a quick list of things that have been fermented, and you feel free to add to this if you know of something else. Just in my ancestors, I guess, in my culture, I'm familiar with fermented honey, fermented wheat, fermented grapes, fermented veggies, fish, and meat, and dairy. So there's many, many, many things that get fermented, and that's what makes our food last. So basically, I wanted to read through that, and then I wanted to show you how to make some fermented carrots. So I started this by adding the dill. Going to get those tips off, or tails, I guess. And I'll show you also some sauerkraut that I made about a month ago now, maybe more actually, like 6 weeks ago, with the kids at the Waldorf school in Edmonton. And yeah, it was a beautiful day. We were outside and they did all the chopping, and there was cabbage all over the grass. It was a great day. And they made 1 jar for them and 1 jar for me. And I'll show you mine. It's been sitting here and I've been burping it. So I'll tell you what burping is. See how I slid those to the side so I can feed these in? I want to pack as many as I can in here. Put these little guys in. Oh, this is a fun one. A 3-legged carrot. You're going that way and that way. I'm not too concerned actually if there's a wee bit of dirt on this. I am confident that the bacteria that are going to grow from that dirt and from the atmosphere, the atmosphere that we're creating for it, all those good bacteria are going to proliferate in this jar and make this work. I also got 3 cloves of garlic earlier. Just going to stick those in. Whoop! That one ended up on the floor. Okay, I'm going to keep stuffing these guys in. I want them to go below the level of this edge here. I call this the shoulder of the jar. So it has to go below there. And the more carrots in there, the less water will have to go in. And it's actually not water that I'll be putting in. I shouldn't say that. It's actually brine. So the brine that we're going to add to this jar, I think I'm now calculating how high these are going to be to fit underneath it there. They're going to be a little short this time. The brine concentration varies depending on which vegetable you're putting, you're fermenting. There's a great chart available on the Probiotic Jar website. I'm going to put these guys in sideways. And it will tell you how much water and how much salt to add together to create different concentrations of salt. So for a carrot, and for each type of vegetable too. So for carrots that do not require a high brine concentration, you only need 2% brine. And to make that, I did the calculations already. Let me just finish tidying that up. Put this over here, and I'll show you how I did that. So I have a measuring cup, a scale. This is my Baba's scale. So she's here with us too. This was when you had to weigh your letters to know how much postage to put on them. So this is how I am weighing my salt, but I need 10 grams of salt for this 500 milliliters of water to create the 2% brine. Those calculations are all also in the recipes that you'll be finding. And right now I've tiered this little cup so that I know whatever I'm measuring is just the salt. And I'm going to add enough salt. That was actually almost right there. So there is my 10 grams. I'm going to add 10 grams of salt, 500 milliliters of water, and then stir that up. There we go. There's my spoon. I'm going to stir this until it's dissolved, and then I'll add it to this. Oh, I messed up. I wanted to show you this cool thing. Let me get this big guy out of here. Come on, there you go. Okay, put this back. And the reason I'm doing that is this one is kind of thin and flexible. And these guys right now are all pointing in this direction. So if I take this one now and measure there to there, make it a bit thinner, I can fit this into this part of the shoulder and that part of the shoulder, and it's going to hold all the carrots down and keep them there so that when I add my brine now, these hopefully won't float. See one that's possibly loose, and I'll show you in my sauerkraut jar the solution to that. So this solution basically now goes in here, fills all empty spaces, and I want it to come above the level of the carrot, so it's basically right at that edge here. Now I'm going to get a lid. This is the lid I'll use. There's not very much space between these two. And I'm putting it on very tightly. This is where you could end up with a bit of a disaster if you're not in your kitchen very often. But hopefully you are. Just in case you aren't, I'm putting this jar inside of another bowl. And if this does decide to leak or fizz out, or have so much pressure, because there's going to be carbon dioxide produced from this biological reaction that's going to happen. The bacteria that is on the outsides of these carrots is going to enjoy this salt bath that I've given it. And they are going to proliferate, and they are going to have leftover, we'll call them excretions, but it's acetic acid, it's lactic acid, and it's carbon dioxide. And all of those things, well, the two acids are going to help preserve the food, and the carbon dioxide is going to need to be released. So twice a day, I'll do this and off. That's all it is. Little burp, and then I'm done. If I didn't do that, it would be a mess. It would definitely be a mess. So just do it. That's all there is to it. If you can't do it, get somebody else to do it. Sorry, I got those little fungus gnats in my house. Yeah, get somebody else to do it, or you can purchase things like, where is it? This guy. You put water in there, and it naturally allows the the carbon dioxide to release. This one here would be on a narrow, like a narrow bottle top. But you can get specialized lids that you plug with these plugs, and the water just, this one's lost its little cap, but then it just releases that carbon dioxide on its own, and you don't have to babysit it. I like to reuse stuff, and I happen to be lucky enough to be in my kitchen a lot, so I just burp it. That's what I do. And it was really fun for the Waldorf kids too, by the way, to do that. Yeah, they came into school and burped, which is too much fun. I'm gonna get one more thing. This is a cheesecloth that isn't, actually this one's in great shape. So if it wasn't in great shape, I wouldn't mind cutting it open to show. Oh yeah, it's got one hole. Basically what I wanted to show you is you can use scissors to cut this, maybe 3 inches by 3 inches, a disc of little piece of cloth. This is actually called butter muslin. When you say cheesecloth, that's usually a wider weave, and it's not really good for cheese at all, or butter, or any of those things, but this is called butter muslin. The Marshall Discount Fabrics sells it for real cheap. So anyways, 3 inch by 3 inch piece, and you can, if that dill had started to float, or if there was any reason that something was floating here, I would put that disc of cloth that piece of cloth in and tuck it in with a spoon all around, or knife or something, to have the edges tucked in, and that would keep all of the interior vegetable bits submerged underneath the level of the brine. Okay, so I wanted to just quickly show you a few other ferments that I have. How far into the 707? I'm good. I got lots of time. Hooray. Okay. These are some pickles. So these are made with the cucumber pickles, basic pickles, but also these were fermented. So they would call these brine pickles and not vinegar pickles. And in this case, you'll see this lovely big piece of dill flour, but also in here, I stuck, there it is, this long leaf, which is folded in on itself. Open that up and you can see it. That is a horseradish leaf. And the reason I put that in, it's high in tannins. If you don't have horseradish, you can use grape leaves. And the tannins keep the outsides of the pickle, the cucumber skin, nice and crisp. Tannins do that. So that's why we added the horseradish or grape leaves to that, because they're high in tannins. Let's see what else I have. Oh yeah, these were the stems of Swiss chard. So that was delicious. Or it could have been kale, actually. This is now 2 years old. It's been sitting in my fridge for a while. And they've become more delicious as they fermented longer. So there's something happening in the culturing and in the bacteria. And the longer it sits in there, the more delicious it's become. So those are now delicious. And this one here is garlic scapes. I don't know if you can see the curls of them. And you can see these little bits of floaties in there. I think that's a com. There's an H in it, K-A-H-M, yeast. Totally edible, still good. So these are a pickled garlic scape. And then this is not related at all, but it's something funky my aunt did when she came to visit. She took the cauliflower that was left over in the fridge and put it into the brine from the store-bought pickles. So not brine pickles like these, but the vinegar pickles, like the Vicks pickles. she took the cauliflower bits and stuck it in that same brine, and it's been there for another 5 months. So this cauliflower has been sitting in an acid and it's still delicious. It's become a pickle itself, but because it's been sitting in that acid that came with the original pickles. So that's a good waste-free kind of a technique. Don't throw away that great pickle juice. In this case, it was store-bought pickle juice, but in this case, this pickle juice is equally delicious and worth saving. Once I'm finished these last 2 little bits of cucumber in there, I can boil a bunch of hard-boiled some eggs and stick those in there. And about 3 weeks later, I'll have those delicious hard-boiled eggs that'll be pickled. So that's that. These ones here, yeah. And so these ones here, the new ones, these are the ones that are out of the fridge. And the reason they're in the fridge is because I've opened them already. And I guess technically they're open all the time, but these are the ones we're using right currently. And then there's more of these in the cold storage downstairs. That room is at about 14 degrees. So those ferments are continuing to ferment a little bit because they're slightly warmer than our fridge temperature. There's some sauerkraut in this fridge that's 2 years old and we're still eating that. Oh yeah, the sauerkraut. Okay, I'm gonna unplug this and show you the sauerkraut. You still see me? Good. This is the sauerkraut that I made with the Waldorf kids. And it's a giant big, let me turn this light on for you. Get rid of that. Okay. So this big jar has been sitting in this bowl because it did overflow. You can see the stuff. I'll just call it stuff. Some people might get really grossed out by this. It's perfectly fine. It's a calm yeast again, and it's totally benign. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just there. I'm not worried about it. The reason I could just take this away now because it's finished overflowing, and it's just sort of sitting there slowly. Well, it's finished basically. This can now go in the cold storage, but I wanted to show you how I had saved or kept the top from getting access to air. So I did that crossed thing with the carrots under the shoulders of the jar, and that kept down this big leaf, and that big leaf is actually the outer leaf of the cabbage itself, and then all of this is the shredded cabbage. In this case, all of this liquid came from the cabbage. When it was pounded, you add an inch of shreds or chopped cabbage, then a little scoop of salt and more shreds of cabbage and more salt, shreds and salt, and you pound it down with whatever wooden thing. I've been using my rolling pin, and that works well. And you just pound it all down, and this salt draws out the liquid from the cabbage leaves, and then that liquid is full of salt, and that's what helps preserve the cabbage and creates that lactic acid that's and the acetic acid that's preserving the cabbage and turning it into sauerkraut. So you can see those 2 carrots did the majority of the job. I probably didn't need to use these, but I wanted to show them because they're funky. Rigel made these for us. They have his name on them, and his clay teacher was very impressed. So this you could use in a narrower jar to get it in, and then to weigh down whatever it is that you are fermenting. And because it's clay, if there is this porous side is good. That's holding on to all the good bacteria and keeping your food safe. It's almost like a little starter right into your jar there. Okay, let me just look at my notes in case I've forgotten something. Dill, carrots, and sauerkraut, and I read all of this stuff. So let me know, I guess, if you have any questions on that.
First question from Michelle. Do veggies have to be in peak condition, i.e. could you ferment carrots that are slightly soft?
I would, but yeah, I think you could. Slightly soft would be all right.
Nice.
Yeah, you
Second
want them
question
to
also.
be in good, sorry, you want them to be in good enough condition that you would eat them. Yeah.
That makes sense. Next question from Michelle. Can any and all vegetables be fermented, or are there some that don't make the cut? Does water content in a vegetable influence or change the fermentation?
Yes, there's a great chart in the probiotic jar website. Those ones, so the higher the water content, the higher salt you need to add. And often the shorter the fermentation time. So if you were to make a fresh salsa, you would only want it on the counter for 3 days and it'd be done. And then you'd have to eat it. Tomatoes, for example, because they're so high in water. Cucumbers are one of the ones that need a 5% salt solution, and carrots and cabbage only needs a 2% salt solution. So those determinations have been made already by foodies who like weighing things, which isn't me. And but those things exist, and yeah, it's easy to find them. Yeah.
Awesome. Wanda had a question about the book you mentioned. I'll just say, Wanda, all resources will send out in an email afterwards, so I don't worry too much about author's name and such. The next question from Jacqueline is, when can you stop burping the veggies? How long does it take?
It often depends on how healthy your bacteria is on the carrots, so or the cabbages, and whether it's in good shape, I guess. So one of the things you can do to aid that is to add a pre-existing culture. And so if you already have some sourdough that has, sauerkraut that has finished, you can add that to your salt and water concentration, your brine, when you're pouring that in, and you will be benefiting these carrots by giving them that head start. You may or may not have an existing live culture. One of the things that I've used in the past is I strain yogurt through my tea strainer. So if I wanted to add just a little bit of actual culture to this, I would just take 2 tablespoons of yogurt and stick it in this, and the liquid would go down through here, and this would end up being lebne, which is a strained yogurt cheese. And then the liquid would go in there, and that liquid would hold all the bacteria, and that would be a starter for your vegetable fermentation. Good question.
Super cool. One quick logistical thing. Could you turn off that light behind you, Mom? The lighting's a bit better when you have it off.
Right. I had that on to show you the cabbage. Thanks. Yeah.
Totally. Dana asks, any suggestions on how to make apple cider vinegar?
Sorry, what was the question about apple cider vinegar? Oh,
how to make it? Yeah.
That's basically what I make anytime I am trying to make apple cider. It seems to always turn into vinegar. And I think that's one of those functions of how much oxygen is in the jar. So if you wanted to make, and also I guess on which bacteria or yeast you are collecting to create that apple cider vinegar. So anytime you're mashing up the apples and sticking them in a jar, you're basically going to get apple cider vinegar. Let me think. I haven't made it this year, so that means my memory is a little slow on that. But it's yeah. What am I trying to? I'm missing something. I am sorry. I've forgotten about apple cider vinegar.
I got your back on this one, Mom. I actually I made Wild's fermented alcoholic cider, and in doing that research, I found that you're correct. It's the amount of oxygen that is in the vessel. So if you were to leave apple juice in a jar and burp it continually, or just leave it with a cloth cover over it, it would eventually ferment to apple cider vinegar. If you put one of those air stops in, like what you showed, that is, if you keep you limit the amount of oxygen going to it, that is what keeps it from going to vinegar and instead makes it go towards alcohol. Just awareness, we're now at 7:20, so we should move towards bread.
Okay.
However, there's a couple more quick questions.
Yeah.
Dwayne asks, could you mix different brines from store-bought pickles?
I think you could, but they wouldn't be alive. Those would
Right.
not be fermented. Those would be vinegar based. I have learned recently that most vinegar is made from GMO corn. So that's where that is. It's already vinegar, and yes, it will preserve things because it doesn't need to be turned into, you don't have to wait for the acids to form from the leftovers of the bacteria. It's already made.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then one quick question from Jacqueline is, she was the one who asked earlier, how long do you have to burp it? But more specifically, how do you know when it's done?
Okay, when you don't burp it anymore. When you're burping it, unless, so in the first 3 days, it can be extremely active, almost to the point where you're wanting to burp it every 2-3 hours. If you don't, you just have to be careful when you open it because it's going to be quite active. But you'll notice on the 3rd or 4th day, maybe even the 7th or 8th day, depending on how warm your kitchen is, that it will burp less. You'll feel less air coming out or less carbon dioxide. So, or you'll have to do it less frequently. And at some point, it'll get to the point where there's very little coming out, and then it's done. Especially if at that point you put it into somewhere cold, then the bacteria will continue to work, but much more slowly. And as long as they're still working, your food is still good to go. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Good
Sweet.
question.
That's all the questions we have on vegetable fermentation. So what's next, Mom?
I'm gonna move all of this stuff over. Great. Okay, well, I have a tiny bit of salty water in here and I don't want to waste that. So I'm going to get my cloth because I got some dill bits all over my counter here. There we go. And I want to show you how to make sourdough bread. Another fermentation, but this case it's going to be the wheat that we're fermenting. This is the sourdough starter that sometimes stays on the counter and sometimes goes into the fridge. Depends on how many people we have expected and how much bread I feel like I'll be making. This lately, it's just the 2 of us at home, so this has been staying in the fridge and not getting used that often. But when I want to use it, I will take it out of the fridge and I put almost all of it into a bowl. I'm going to lift up my phone again so you can see what this looks like. So this is from this morning. You can see all the bubbles on top. And when I took it out of the fridge, I took almost all of it out of this jar, left only a teaspoon remaining in here, and everything else went into the big bowl. And into then, let me set this down. Into this jar then, I added probably 3 tablespoons of flour and 3 tablespoons of water. So a 1-to-1 ratio. I kind of fudged it actually because I probably did not have 3 tablespoons of starter to start, but knowing that it just giving a bit more time, it would still make this starter happy. I was okay with adding just slightly bit more of those 2 other ingredients. So every time you're feeding your starter, you're going to look at how much is in the jar, how much starter you have, and you add that much water and again, that much flour. So those are all in 1-to-1-to-1 ratios. And that is the feeding method. Those are the ratios needed to feed your sourdough. If you were making this sourdough from scratch, you would take just water and just flour, the same amount of both, put it in a jar and leave it on your counter. Again, with that kind of a cloth over top of it so that air can get in. There are natural yeasts all floating all around us. Those will get in there, but the fungus gnats won't. So that's the bonus. And then, so then those yeasts incorporate themselves into this food that you've given them, and they eventually start to proliferate. It takes about 7 to 10 days for that to happen. So once you've done that, it's kind of nice just to keep that around and not have to do it every time. So that's why we keep the starter around instead of having to restart it from scratch every time. So that keeping the starter around means feeding it 1 to 1 to 1, 1 starter, 1 flour, and 1 water. If you keep it in the fridge, it's chillier there, and that behooves, that is friendly environment for the yeasts. They like to be active in a colder region. If you keep it on the counter, there are other bacterial organisms that will proliferate more than the yeasts. Both the bacteria and the yeasts will have the byproduct of carbon dioxide. And it's the carbon dioxide that is filling the little bubbles, which are created with the gluten in the flour that rises your bread. So the carbon dioxide can come either from yeasts or bacteria, or a blend of both. If you like a sourdough, then you'll want the bacterially produced carbon dioxide, so on the counter. If you like just a fluffier, yeasty type of sourdough, then it might be beneficial to you to keep your sourdough starter in the fridge. But both will produce the carbon dioxide that will rise your bread. So after you've fed it, that's the important thing, is always feed your babies. You can then either leave it on the counter if you think you're going to be making bread the next day, or put it in the fridge so it'll last probably a week before you have to feed it again. You could also keep it in your freezer for up to 3 months, or you could keep it on your counter for about 4 or 5 hours until it gets nice and bubbly, and then pour it out onto cookie sheet, and that becomes the dried starter. Where's mine? Oh, I didn't get that out. Okay, I think I gave it all to a friend, so I don't have any right now. But basically, you pour it onto the cookie sheet, and it dries out, and it flakes up off, and it becomes these flaked chunks of, looks like crackers. And you put those in a jar, and you can reuse those anytime. Just add water, and then you've started up your starter again. So that's a way to preserve your starter if you don't want to keep it in the freezer. Okay, so that's the feeding part. But what if you want to make bread? Then at the same time that I poured this out and I fed it, I also fed the starter that I had poured out. Again, it was the 1 to 1 to 1 because I was in feeding mode. I was trying to make it happy. Let me show you the bubbles as I lift this spoon up. There's a lot of fluff happening in there. That is nice, fluffy, and ready to go sourdough. So the next thing that would go in here to make bread, at this point now I have fluffy, happy, ready to go sourdough starter. Now I'm going into bread making mode. So it's a different set of ratios. It's a 1, 2, 3 ratio. So instead of weighing things, I've been really lucky with the 1, 2, 3 method. You'll see sourdough 1, 2, 3 recipes all over the internet, and it's also a way to make it like so simple. It's the easiest thing. I did this and it took me less than 5 minutes in the morning. I'll do it again tonight, and by tomorrow morning I'll be making bread. So now I have this happy fluffy sourdough starter. Then I look at it, I see how much is there. Today it looks like maybe 3/4 a cup or a cup. So I'm going to add, so if that's 3/4 of a cup, this is my 1. And to double that, that's how much water I'm going to add. And triple it, and that's how much flour I'm going to add. So I'm looking at this, and I'm going to add a 1.5 cups of water. Often as I play around in my kitchen here, where did I do with it? I think it's in the bathroom. I have some whey because I've been making cheese. So often instead of water, I would use whey. And that's another thing that's adding good bacteria to this bread. So in this case, I'll just top this up to a 1.5 cups. I have Actually, I can use it from here too. We're on a well, so we don't have any chlorine in our water. So we have well water or distilled water to choose from here. But in the city, if you're using tap water, all you need to do is put your water in a jar like this for 24 hours. And by the next day, 24 hours later, you'll have no chlorine in it. So you do want to get rid of the chlorine before you add it to your bacteria. You don't want to kill your bacteria with chlorine because they're going to help us make the little carbon dioxide parts. Oops, you know, the burps. So anyways, we're going to put 3/4 of a cup times 2 because this is the 2 part of the 1, 2, 3. So that water is going in there. This is where I deviate from the 1, 2, 3. Now I have to add a bit of salt. There is no part of the ratio that adds that. I just used a tablespoon. So mix those together. The salt is now dissolving into that. And then on top of that, the third part, the 1, 2, 3, that would be 1 1/2 plus 3/4, 2 and a bit, 2 1/4. Of the flour. So this is flour that I ground earlier. It's whole wheat flour. I'm going to add all of it and I'll make dough. I will teach you about making dough. That's the other cool thing I've learned. Taking this guy out of there. Okay, so I'm going to stir this all together. And it's looking to me like it's going to be a bit on the wet side. Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Use 2 hands. Yeah, definitely on the wet side. So once I've recognized that, I can start adding. Perhaps it would have looked a little on the dry side, but this case I can tell from experience that that's a little wet. So now I will add some more flour to make this the right consistency. So there are very many recipes and very many complications to making sourdough. Many people like to measure exactly. And it's just not my way. So I just add a little bit at a time and wait until I get the right consistency. And again, this didn't come easy. The boys, the men that are watching have been victims of my hockey puck bread. They can tell you it took a lot of experience. So maybe do follow one of those recipes where you have to measure. But at this point, you can see it's still gathering up some of that flour that's on the bottom, but it's kind of wet too. So this is a good time. Okay, so a couple things. We can either stretch and fold this, or we can knead it. The stretch and fold method, I would just leave this now, and I would come back 20 minutes from now, pick up the outsides and pull it to the inside. Turn the bowl to the outside, and that's called folding or stretching and folding. Then come back half an hour after that and do it again. And it takes maybe 20 seconds each time you have to do that. But that's pretty negligible effort, I would say. The other fun thing, if you had a bad day and you do feel like taking it out on your dough, you can knead. And I need to knead. So now I have this part, which is kind of wet. That's all right, because I have this part that's dry. And I have this little bit of flour on the outside. So I'll take that dry part and fold it over and squish it away. Fold towards me, squish away. You can use the heels of your hand to squish. I give it a quarter turn, fold towards, squish away. Quarter turn, fold, squish. Turn, fold, squish. Turn, fold, squish. And eventually it becomes a rhythm that you do over and over.
I could just stop right there. Did you see how it's already doing that expansion thing? That's awesome. That means it's like ready already. That's that sourdough starter had already conditioned the original flour that was in there, and adding that whole wheat has done nothing to the condition of that. So that's beautiful. Or I could keep going for a while here and make sure that it's good and kneaded. And what I'm doing as I shear like that, the proteins are shearing one another and actually forming bonds that create these long elastic chains that then become the elastic or the balloons that are trapping the carbon dioxide that's being made by the bacteria and the yeast. Watch what's happening when I squish and it comes back. That means it's practically ready already, and I have done very little in the way of kneading. So you can do it with one hand or both hands. And that is basically it. So it's not really completely conditioned yet, and we won't have time to show you what that looks like, but you'll see this nice round edge is happening. I'm kind of folding it under each time, and you'll see this side is kind of that folded edge. I can pinch all that together, and I could just leave this in a buttered loaf pan for about 4 or 5 hours and bake it. Or my preferred method is to take a basket. I got a couple of, take this one here, and it already has leftover rice flour in there. So I'm just going to leave that. And this is going to be difficult to shape because of the flour on it. But as I pull towards me, the outside of this is getting tighter and creating that nice crust forming. So that sits like that overnight, or that's like 12 hours, or even 24 hours if you want to put it in both. Actually, you both in both cases, you put it in the fridge with a cloth over top. And then tomorrow morning, I'll come out here and I will preheat this guy. Thanks, Kevin. And this is the big cast iron pot. Get this up to 450 degrees with the lid off of it in this oven underneath here. And then this will have been on the counter while the oven is preheating. Once it's hot, I bring this out onto the stove, toss that in. It poofs up out. Whoa, put the lid on. Poofs up in there because of the moisture that's happening. It's sealed in, and it makes the crust good and crusty. So I like that crusty bread. And then you take the lid off the last 20 minutes and it's finished. So that is a quick how to make sourdough bread. Oh yeah, we were talking about also other things you can do. So that's the boule, your basic round loaf. But you could also take this dough, spread it out like a cinnamon bun, and add whatever cinnamon bun type things you like. You can add bacon and cheese to that. You can add leftover meatloaf. Yeah, whatever you wanted to add to that. So yeah, at this point, there would be no need to add any other leaveners because your sourdough starter is what's going to rise that beautiful bread. Okay, any questions?
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Mom. You are doing fantastic. I have lived with you for most of my life, and I'm learning a lot. So I'm sure that other folks are doing their best to keep up. And if not, we'll be recording this. We have a couple of questions, but none super relevant to what you just did. Maybe one quick from Jacqueline. Can you use metal spoons / bowls?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Because it's not going to be in there for long anyways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and then Jacqueline also asks, are these instructions in writing? Maybe you can answer that quickly.
They will be. Some of them are in files in my computer, and I'm going to put them all together with links for you guys to make your own adaptations for those.
Awesome.
One of the other breads that I wanted to go into, oh, sorry, I know I'm interrupting, was to use, there it is, speaking of things in metal that shouldn't be,
This is some kefir that I strained, and that's been there for 2 days now, sitting on the counter in metal. All the kefir people would be appalled, but I would add flour to this, and that would become bread also, because there's existing yeasts in the kefir. Kefir, that stuff, this stuff. I'll go into kefir in a minute. So if you
Awesome.
just know, sorry, speaking of waste, I know I'm still chatting away, but I just was doing this with my hands as I'm talking to you, and all of this stuff fell off of it. And that is going to go into my sourdough starter. I'm going to use, this is my fancy tool. That just goes in there and it starts feeding the starter. So it's still useful. Your counter now is practically clean, just ready for a cloth. You don't have to worry about it. Okay.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. Doing great. We have roughly 20 minutes left.
Okay.
So however much cheese you want to do with that,
Okay.
I'll let you take it away.
Okie dokie. Cheese. I want to talk about cheese for 3 days. Okay, so part of cheese making, the main part of cheese making is thinking about it from the perspective of the person with the cow, which is me right now, or the goats. This person is getting milk daily from an animal, and it's coming out of that animal at body temperature. So the best way to preserve that huge amount of dairy is to turn it into cheese. That's what nature did. That's how nature designed milk to be used. If you look at the stomach of a calf, not only does it have the enzyme that turns it into a coagulated mass, crunches those proteins into solids, but it also has the bacteria existing in the milk that makes it that flavor and gives that preservation part. And that stomach also has lines of muscle in it that cut the curd, which is astounding to me that that little baby's stomach is actually a cheese making machine. So that's pretty cool to think about. When we look at nature, it has the answers for us. So yeah, so that fourth stomach, I actually have one. I'm going to show it to you. I wish you could smell this because it smells like cheese. This came from a baby animal. Yes, it came from a baby cow, a very large one from the looks of things. My cows are not this big. And I have used portions of this. You can see where I ripped it off. And in a cheese making tradition, they would rip off parts of this, put it in the whey from the cheese making of that day, and then they would use that whey to culture and to coagulate the next day's cheese. So it's, again, part of that rhythm of the daily excessive amounts of dairy. So that's where this is the rennet. This is the chymosin enzyme. It comes from the fourth stomach of a cow. This stomach has enough chymosin in it for that cow's entire year's worth of dairy making or of milk making. Again, nature just designed it so perfectly. So this is one way of getting rennet, but I've also resorted to the easy way myself and getting it in these little bottles. There's teeny little, too many. This guy, tiny little pellets of chymosin or that rennet that was derived. This is derived from the stomach of a calf that was sucking its mother's milk. So it had that enzyme in it still. If that baby calf had started eating hay or grass, then the chymosin wouldn't be as strong. So this does come from a very small beastie, and that's part of a tradition that kept that ecosystem at a level that wasn't being abused. So that's a longer story. I don't want to get into that too much, actually. But the other thing that you add to milk is culture. And the other daily routine that I do is I feed the cultures.
And they are up here. I don't know if you can see them. Maybe I'll bring them down. This one here is the cow kefir. And this one here is the goat kefir. And this one here is the goat clabber. So kefir is what came from, here we go. That's what I want. This is what I want. Actually, we don't know. We don't know where kefir came from. No one has been able to replicate it. No one has been able to create it from scratch. Unlike the sourdough starter that I showed you how to do, we are not able to make kefir grains. They come from a friend. They come from somebody else who's already had them, and they proliferate once you feed them the milk from a cow or goat. You can see that it's coating the inside of this jar. This one I fed this morning, so it's not very liquid yet, but I want to just strain it so I can show you the kefir grain. Normally it wouldn't be that liquid. By tomorrow morning, this will be the consistency of yogurt. And it's okay that I stirred it halfway through, that's no big deal. But I wanted to show you this little wobbly guy inside here. This is the kefir grain. And I can kind of pull it apart and you can see, oh, now it actually came apart, but it's got folds upon folds upon folds of itself. It's a magical, magical beast. Well, they know for sure it's at least 37 different kinds of beasts and yeasts living together there. So put that back in here. And then this kefir here is the goat, and this is thicker. You can even see a few little lines on the bottom there, some openings where the yeast has created a few pockets of carbon dioxide already in there. And then the last one I wanted to show you is this, which I believe is also not finished yet. So this is the clabber. No point in showing that to you because it still looks a little bit like milk. I do have some finished clabber here. Now this one in the fridge. This clabber has been in the fridge for 10 days. Look at this beautiful topping on it. This is the geotrichum. You can almost see how fuzzy that is. It's not, I guess you can maybe see where my finger touched. Over here, it's kind of shiny, whereas over there, it's not shiny. That's a geotrichum candidum, which is a kind of fungus that's growing on top of the clabber. Yummy. And then underneath here is the clabber. Also yummy. But that is full of the cultures that I'm going to put in milk with a little bit of the rennet, which are those little tiny pills I showed you. Forgot to turn this back on. Okay. So yeah, in order to make cheese, you're going to add culture, which in this case is either clabber or kefir. Both of them contain lots of mesophilic, thermophilic, all the kinds of philic bacteria you could want. Many cheese books talk about using specific aroma B or M139D. Those are specific kinds of bacteria that they have isolated and created bacteria that make those bacteria. And no, they don't make that bacteria. What am I saying? They've isolated the bacteria down to one species, and they've used that to create cheddar. In a traditional kitchen, somebody's cottage where cheddar was first made, they didn't have those single vat inoculants. They're called DVIs, direct vat inoculants. They didn't have those. They had clabber, and they probably didn't even have kefir, because kefir is a more recent thing. I mean, it's been around forever, but not this part of the world. So the clabber is what they would have used, and they add that to the milk. And where did they get the clabber? That's the question, right? This clabber came from the milk itself, the cow itself. If you don't have a cow, you can get kefir grains from me or any other friend that has them, and they will turn the store-bought milk into kefir, and they will make that into healthy milk. So you can make these cheeses from store-bought milk as well. But the original clabber would have had to come from an unpasteurized situation, because those bacteria cannot be killed. They're coming straight out of the cow and into the jar and sitting there. The first time this clabber sat here, it probably took 5 or 6 days for it to solidify and coagulate because of the acids forming in that lactic meaning cheese, right? Or milk, dairy. Those lactic bacteria are going to then create the clabber. The first time that happened, it took a while for the community of bacteria to develop so that they got to that stage, because they were all fighting for the same nutrients, the same sugars, the lactose that was in the dairy. So after that first time, then you take a spoonful of that clabber, add it to a clean, fresh jar, and add more milk from that morning in there, and it'll only take 24 hours now for this one to become clabbered, basically. So now that that bacterial colony is established, it's easier to reproduce, just like the sourdough starter. It's a way of preserving that. It becomes part of your daily routine. So this is the one that's finished. This is the one I'm probably going to eat tomorrow. And this is the one that is not finished, and it needs another 12 hours, maybe a little longer, because our house is a little chillier now that it's wintertime, but it should take about 24 hours for this to become clabber. So earlier today, I did that, and I made a big mixture in this pot of both cow and goat milk, and then I let it sit for an hour after I added the rennet. And in that case, I think I used the cow kefir for that. You'll see on here, there's a little dial of days. So I'm going to put this, today's Thursday, this little bean, this is a little fava bean, goes on Thursday. Then I know that I did it on Thursday. So that's my little trick for that. So this morning, I put this morning's milk for both the cow, and the goat in here. And then I waited an hour for that curd to set. I cut it vertically in this direction and then in this direction. And then I tried as well as I could with, where is it? My fancy tool here. I've lost it. It's basically a metal spatula. And I went sideways as I could in 3 different directions. That video is on the Good Note Community Farm Instagram page, because I thought that was fun this morning. If you want to look at how I did that. And then after that, I also added a video of what the curds look like after you warm them up. So I stuck my hand and make sure my hand is clean again. Stuck my hand into this pot. I have these little stools so I can be up high and reach in, and I just stirred those curds with my hand for about 20 minutes, and then they became tiny little curds, and after that they settled to the bottom, and you can see kind of squished them to the bottom. See this big wheel of cheese now? Where'd my big pot go? Here it is. So I've got this big bowl, big wheel of cheese. I'm going to take a little bit of this off, a little bit like that. I'm going to stick it in this little mug with a spoon. I'm waiting for that water to heat up, and then I will test to see whether this is ready to stretch, because it's going to become cacio cavallo, which is one of the pasta filata cheeses. It's related to mozzarella and provolone, the Oaxacan string cheeses, all those cool things. But this is what it will become, hopefully, before you guys are done tonight. This is a little cacio cavallo. Cacio means cheese, cavallo means horse, And they used to have two of these, and one would sit on one side of the horse and the other side of the horse as they brought it back after spending a whole summer up on top of the mountain making cheese. This is so the cheese got a bit of the flavor of the horse on it, and it would last. This would be an aged cheese. It's hard. So good videos online of how they cover those over a fire and then scrape it onto some homemade bread. It's delicious. Okay, so just waiting for that to heat. And then I'm going to be pouring that hot water over top of this and stretching this if this tells me that it's ready. I feel like that's about all I can do about cheese. Where are we at? Yeah, we're pretty much out of time. So please come and make cheese with me someday. And there's so much more to say about cheese. Okay, let me go and see what questions there are. And
phenomenal again. Thanks a bunch, Mom.
Okay.
We had one question that's been asked by two people now. How can fermentation go wrong? How do you tell and how can you fix it?
Well, one, it tastes bad. But sometimes you don't want to be that guinea pig. So you want to smell it for sure. And how else would you know? I guess like color, black may not be good, but brown's okay, pink's okay, red's okay, blue is okay. But I don't know why I know those things. They just like experience. And no fear, knowing that the good bacteria is already in me from having all of this good stuff, all these fermented things. I know that those good bacteria in my gut are keeping the bad ones from having any effect. So any small amount of badness isn't going to affect me. I just have this superpower in my head. Maybe it's all in my head, but maybe it's in my gut. And I so far, knock on wood, it works. So, but go easy for sure. When you're starting on ferments, your gut may not be ready for all that goodness, and you might have a reaction diarrhea-wise or some such thing. And so, yeah, it's good to go slow and know what your body can handle. Oh, I did have some things to say about this. Sorry, I just say, when I was trying to put this together with thinking of how to reduce waste, because I know that's part of the format here and what we're thinking about, that all of these things take a lot of planning ahead and thinking about constantly, it seems. So some of that becomes a habit, some of that becomes just repetition and muscle memory, but unless you start, it won't happen. So that's one thing, is planning ahead. The other thing is, let me just turn this off now. Learning how to make do. I call it making do. Basically, if something doesn't go the way you want it to, that as long as it's healthy still, and as long as it's not going to kill you, eat it anyways. It's still going to be good. And the way you eat it anyways is the last thing I was talking about, and that is to be creative, to think of how to make that food edible for yourself. The trick is getting your kids to want to eat it for yourself. It can be easier than making kids that way. And then if all else fails, there's always the chickens. So it's never wasted, because you can, if you have chickens, you can give it to them. So maybe someone on your block has chickens, or you can take them down to the Northlands Urban Farm and ask them first, but they'll probably like it if you give them some good food. So I'm just showing you now, this is this cheese stretch test, and you can see sort of stretching, but it's not quite ready yet. So I'll be stretching this closer to midnight, it looks like. There.
Awesome.
Okay.
I think that we should start wrapping up. But there's one more, I think, really good, relevant question from Jacqueline. Are you doing in-person classes, specifically on cheese making? But I'm sure folks would be interested in any other classes you might be doing.
I'm not doing any on cheese making yet. Yeah, I just don't have a space that I feel good with that yet, that people could be distant and still want to be together and be able to see everything that's involved, because cheese, you just want to get your hands into it. And I don't think we're quite ready for that yet.
But I am teaching basketry. And this December, I have one more class planned. Oh, this weekend, I've got one that's full. But in January and February, March, I'll be teaching online free through the Alberta Natural Baskets. And I'll be teaching some paid classes, more in-depth stuff at the Aspen Ridge Gardens. How do I sign up? Okay, yes, you can sign up for any of those classes through the goodnote.ca website.
I was just going to jump on and say thank you, Maryann, and thank you everyone who attended today. And Garnet, now that I see your Wi-Fi is back, I'll pass it back over to you.
You're doing great, Alicia. That's pretty much all I have to say as well. Mom, love you so much, and you're so amazing. And I'm so glad that we have this recorded, because now I can show my great-grandchildren and we can keep these traditions alive. If I don't manage to learn all these things in due time. So thanks so much, Mom.
Okay, thank you guys.
If anyone wants to stick around, I'll play an accordion song, which is how we've been ending the Wasted webinars. But thanks so much. Oh, I need to practice. That's all for now, folks. Thanks very much for attending, and thanks so much, Mom. You are fantastic.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.